Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. Catching up today with Ari from Saltwater and Stars. We got together last just over a year ago in episode 96. If you haven't listened to that, some of this goes back to it, so you might want to track that down. I also want to take a moment and thank everybody who is supporting the Patreon. This month I am rolled out the Facebook group, and although with all this coronavirus stuff going on, I've been a little slow getting that going. Folks there are going to also get a free pass for my Learning Tarot class, which I'm teaching on May 2nd, and stuff is going to start ramping up there over the next little while. So if you are not a supporter of the Patreon, you might want to head over there to patreon.com/thehermitslamp. If you sign up at any level, you get early access to every episode. For this episode, that means that it dropped on Saturday, and for everybody else, it came out on Tuesday. You also, if you support at the $5 level, you get access to the bonus material. For this episode, Ari and I talked about all of our practical tools for getting present and staying present. It'll make a lot of sense when you listen to the episode. And if you support at the $10 level, you get to participate in the Facebook group, where there will be all sorts of extra material, as well as extra classes and other great freebies going on there. So thank you all for your support. If you're not supporting it, think about how much of this podcast you've listened to and consider pitching in. Everything helps. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Hermit Slamp podcast. I am here today with Ari from Saltwater and Stars. Last year, I just looked it up, about a year ago, almost to the day, we recorded a podcast on, Love, Spirit, Polyamory was the title for it. And we've been chatting some in between, and I kind of thought that during this quarantine time, having an episode about relationships might be an interesting thing, because there are a lot of people in a lot of situations that are suddenly different in one way or another. So, as well as all the sort of other differences that are happening. But, I guess in case people don't know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself again?
Yes, introductions. So I'm Ari, as he said. I'm an astrologer, a bruja. I live in Central PA. My family is from Puerto Rico and New York. I'm a writer, a poet, and that pretty much sums it up.
Cool. So I guess one of the things that we could maybe start by talking about is what's going on for you, or what do you care to share around like your life and relationship now? We're all in lockdown, or we're all ideally socially distancing, or as I hear they want us to call it now, physically distancing, because they don't want to undermine the social part.
Social spaciousness.
Social spaciousness, right? What's going on for you with this?
Yeah, this actually interestingly has me thinking so much more about relationship, or so much more clearly, because I'm always thinking about relationship. For me, so I practice relationship anarchy and just really trying to consciously deconstruct hierarchy and capitalism in relationships. And I feel so grateful to be in that practice right now, because it's allowing me to tap into support system and be available to support system in a way that might have been more challenging if I was trying to operate in hierarchies and kind of be under this premise like, okay, so I'm in lockdown with my partner, so like I really only need to rely on my partner, and that's the beginning and the end of it. Mm-hmm. But being able to tap into broader network of care and mutual aid and solidarity because of my understanding and my belief that every single relationship is a living entity and they're all equally important.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I've been investing into that practice over the last several years, I'm feeling really grateful for right now, because I feel like I'm at a point where I can lean into that. Like I can lean into friendship and romance and spiritual relationship, like all these moving parts without, like, I don't feel like I've had to reorient much. So I know that a lot of people are reorienting towards relationship right now because they have the time, or they have the awareness that it seems like it's more urgent than usual. But I think it's always urgent to be in right relationship, and it's always urgent to be investigating how we understand and how we perpetuate and create and collaborate with others.
Mm-hmm. So, I think that one of the things that's really always interesting about talking about poly is that, there are these ideas or these words or these labels, models and stuff that float around. And, I think it's always kind of helpful to try and talk as explicitly as possible what we mean by that, because, it's one of those things where one person's relationship anarchy might be another person's, something else, right? Or the level of anarchy or the level of whatever in their definition of it might not be the same, right? So can you try and like sum up what that approach means for you?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked me that, because I'm currently trying to do that for something that I'm writing, and I also have to do it for this community that I want to be a part of. And so I've been trying to pinpoint what my definition is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's, like you're saying, like that's one of the tricky and challenging things about it. But it's also the thing about it that I like, is that the definition is always evolving, which kind of brings us into the whole like reality of relationship, the fact that it's always fluid, it's always changing. And when we're trying to pin it down, when we're trying to contain it or control it, that's when it becomes destructive, or it becomes a struggle rather than a challenge. And so for me, relationship anarchy right now is the phrase that I'm using to encapsulate the way that I'm committed to not looking at relationships as places to extract, or places to just get my needs met, or to even just meet other people's needs. And also detaching from outcomes. And so I think that's one of the ways that capitalism shows up in relationships. It's like, okay, so what is this, and what are we getting out of it, and what's the future of it, and what are the rules, and what are the expectations? And I don't know how to put much more language to it other than not doing that and just sinking into trust and moving at the speed of trust, as Adrienne Marie Brown says, and allowing things to emerge and unfold, or not things, but allowing people and allowing myself and allowing relationships to become whatever they are. And so I have like several relationships in my life that like are so incredibly intimate, but in our current sociopolitical constructs, that would just be, it would be in the container of a friendship, or it'd be like, oh, this relationship seems like it's a partnership, or seems like it's something serious. And like those things can also be true, but just avoiding the whole, or evading the whole pressure to compartmentalize things and to try to control the way that relationships are, what is the word? Try to control the way relationships are showing up.
I find
and so I think
No,
No,
please
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
please.
No, after you.
You go, because I already forgot what I was going to say. So
I find it interesting because so I've also been sort of trying to think through what what does my relationship model look like? What is it that uh, what is it that I'm available for? What is it that I'm doing?
mm-hmm.
And I think that you know I like you, I struggle with it, right? Like it's there are people who like I'm and they say like five things and they're like they have this clear definition of it and it's great and I'm like, man, that's not me, and I think that um I think that the idea of sort of working to avoid hierarchy is one that's definitely very important for me. I'm not interested um, in hierarchy over other people, and like the only sort of prioritization that happens or that can happen is it's like, well, we had the plan first, therefore we have the plan. Doesn't matter what else is going on. It's like that's the
Yeah.
prioritization, right? And,
The prioritization becomes energetic. Like it becomes like having nothing to do with, okay, well, this is my partner, so I'm going to choose them over my friend or whatever. Like,
right.
I'm so far removed at this point from that way of thinking that I can't even really wrap my mind around it anymore. But I know that most people are in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I bump up against it in a lot of ways. In my friendships, when I'm trying to cultivate intimacy that I forget people aren't actually used to cultivating in quote unquote friendship,
Mm-hmm.
or when I'm like really fluid with where I'm investing my time, attention, and energy. And I think like that's actually part of what it means to not be operating in hierarchy in relationship, is that
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing is energetic management. What you're doing is like maintaining your priorities energetically. Like, what are you, like you said, what are you available for, and what can you show up to with integrity? And that changes day to day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that maybe either I have more work to do. Well, regardless, I have more work to do on deconstructing the impact of, capitalism and so on in my life and so on. But I actually would say that I am a tremendously constant person. And so changes day to day, yeah, not so much, And this is where it's interesting for me, because I've definitely thought a lot about this sort of relationship anarchy. Is that what I'm practicing? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe, right? Like maybe it's a helpful language around it, but my life is also tremendously structured, between
Mm-hmm.
being a half-time solo parent and running my store and all these things. My life has a really high level of structure, and so the sort of the fluidity with which you talk about things is a thing that doesn't really exist so much in my world. And my instinct would just be to say that is in large part because of who I am and how I am. But again, it's very hard to be certain about that in all of these, well, with all of these constructs, right? So
Yeah. Well, I think that what may be happening here is we're talking about two different dimensions.
mm-hmm.
So I completely relate to that. I'm a very consistent person as well.
Mm-hmm.
I take commitment very seriously. Obviously, when I use that word, I'm not talking about in conventional terms, but I believe in commitment as devotion, and that's really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have a very structured life. I run a business, and like
Mm-hmm.
I like structure, but I like structure in the understanding that it's what allows us to have freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Because it eliminates unnecessary chaos. It makes
Mm-hmm.
room for you to do what you really want to do, or you to have the attention and energy that you desire. So I actually completely relate to what you're saying. And I think when I'm talking about fluidity and I'm talking about changes in capacity, it's much more like emotional and spiritual, I guess. You know, so like, for example, Monday I had like zero energy to talk to anyone, and I had a prior engagement to have a check-in with a close friend, and so anything else that any other conversations or relationship check-ins or whatever that I was invited into, I had to decline because of my capacity that day. Whereas yesterday I spent like however many hours on the phone with 2 different people, you know. And so that's kind of what I mean. It's like basically the only way, for lack of a better phrase, relationship anarchy is working for me right now, is understanding that it is, for me, it must be completely and fundamentally based in my relationship to myself.
Yeah.
And my relationship to myself has very little actually to do with the external world or the material realm. Like, that's just the actualization of whatever alignment and whatever I'm creating in the other dimensions.
Yeah, I think
but
that
I still might be high from the bowl I smoked last night. So disclaimer.
I think you're making tons of sense. I think perhaps we are talking on different levels, right? You know, I mean, I think that, you know, tending to oneself and following one's capacity is super important, right? You know, and I think during this, you know, social distancing time more than ever, right? Like, you know, what's the reality of where I'm at today?
You said time more than ever.
Right?
Most popular phrase.
Right? Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I'm sorry. What can I say? They're cliches for a reason, right?
True, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, during any time of stress, right? You know, I think that...
There we go. That's a good one.
It makes way more sense to deeply check in with yourself about where you're at, what you're available for, and then share that information with the people who are important to you, and, you know, and
right.
adjust the sharing of yourself accordingly, right? So
right, exactly
for sure.
And I think, like, when capitalism is running our relationships, we don't do that. We're just like, okay, I have to show up 110 all the time, 24/7.
Yeah.
You know, or conversely, like, people have to show up for me all the time, 24/7. And that's a capitalistic expectation. That's an expectation of extraction.
No, for sure.
And so for me, like, the phrase relationship anarchy is about flipping that on its head and being like, you know, it's anarchy against capitalism, actually. And not any necessarily any anarchy against concepts of relationship itself, but against the constructs that are constricting our relationships.
Yeah, no, I think so, right? And I think that I also, you know, I certainly really deeply identify with, you know, the not having limits on friendships and whatever, right? You know, like some of the people that I'm close with, I'm close at a level which would make, you know, if people were jealous in relationships, they would be jealous of those relationships because
exactly.
Other than being platonic, they have all the rest of the markers of romantic relationship, right? You know, like a deep level of attention, you know, a sort of,
and that's unusual,
right? A barrier-free level of sharing for the most part, you know? It's like, just talk about whatever's going on, you know? And so on, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I like I said, I feel so far removed from that, which is, I feel, such a great blessing to be able to say that I forget that that's the way people operate until I bump up against it. And I think it's like capitalism and whiteness go right in hand. And I think that that's definitely those barriers of intimacy play a huge role in how whiteness survives and how whiteness perpetuates in our relationships, because it's all this illusion of separation. You know, and it's like, no, friends go over here in this spots and you can't do XYZ and you can't talk about XYZ and you can't, you know, be fully yourself. And then like romantic relationships and sexual relationships in this spots. And I just like, I'm extremely passionate about smashing all of that fucking shit.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure.
You know, and like culturally, that's not foreign to me. Like culturally, so many of my titis, like my aunts, were my mom's best friends, but I didn't even know that for years, you know, but the friends were just family, and that was just the way that it was. And I know that a lot of us across cultures actually have that truth, but we forget.
No, for sure. Yeah, you know, I definitely had aunts and uncles who were not that, who were not actually related, right? You know, and my kids have those people who are, you know, they you know, they refer to one set of them, you know, a couple of my friends as their extra dads, you know, and stuff like that, right? You know, like, so they don't call them things in general in that way, but then when they talk about them, they're like, well, you know, they're just like my extra dads. That's who they are, you know, and so
it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, for me, this idea of like parenting from a place where, you know, I want them to have those good, deep connections with people who are wonderful, you know, and whether those are people who are, you know, their friends, like their school friends or whoever, their age, whether that's, you know, teachers and mentors, or whether these people who are, you know, friends of the family and so on, right? Like this prospect of them having sort of the opportunity to have deep connections with people who are going to nurture them from a real place of love and caring. Like, absolutely, please bring as much of that into their lives as possible. And also people who are in their own various ways doing this work of sort of deconstructing expectation and, you know, relationship hierarchy or escalators and other things and so on, right? To like really allow them to have the options to see the world in a different way and to be, you know, more authentic, right? To be unfettered by a limited palette of options when they're thinking about who they want to build their life with and in what ways, right?
Yeah. Community. What a concept.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a gift that I've been trying to give myself in my pursuit of relationship anarchy, because I have so much fracture in my family of origin and like fracture between myself and the concept of community. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot right now when all this shit is going down and going up. That, you know, it reminds me of the concept of chosen family, you know, and I think like part of my devotion to relationship anarchy is about creating that chosen family for myself, and creating community for myself and allowing myself to have those options and allowing myself to receive those gifts that I am estranged from. You know, and so it's deeply political, and it's deeply spiritual, and it's deeply therapeutic. You know, and so in a lot of ways it definitely has been about having more sets and having more pleasure, you know, but that's just a symptom of the deeper reasons and the deeper purpose of why I've even been reconsidering the entire way that I've been conditioned to understand relationship and to understand community and to understand love and romance and even pleasure itself, like I think that I get such a deep pleasure from communing with my friends and like cultivating these intimacies that are like sociopolitically unusual with them, and so um that gift that your children have is the gift that I'm trying to give myself and trying to give my inner child, and then simultaneously trying to give everyone I'm in relationship with.
Yeah,
and like I don't just have to be your friend, I can be your lover. I don't just have to be your lover, I can be your friend too. And like I don't have to just be your friend, I can be family, and like all the, like you said, all of these options that we can have. And also at the same time, interrupting that escalator. Like I like that you brought up escalation, because I think that's another way. That's what I was trying to refer to earlier, talking about how capitalism wants us to focus on outcomes and creating outcomes of our relationships, so it's always like, what's next? Okay, what's next? Okay, what should this be? Because of like this level of intimacy has to be matched up with a certain level of expectation and output or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the things that I've been sort of looking at a lot over the last while is not dissimilar to what you're talking about. Probably it's very similar, just in my own language, right? Is going back and reconnecting with, myself at different ages, and sort of offering myself those things that I didn't get at the time, right? And it's like, and it's very interesting, some of the stuff that returns from that, and like, so like one of the examples is like, when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time by myself. I mean, I spent time with people too, but like in my house where I lived, there wasn't a lot of like, if I didn't want to watch the baseball, which I did not want to watch the sports stuff, then basically it was just me in my room listening to music and whatever, right? And
same.
And, as I've been sort of connecting to that part, around some other stuff that brought it up, one of the things that I realized was, yeah, that part has some healing or something that I can offer it now to be different. But that part also knows a lot about dealing with isolation, and like through the social distancing stuff, I'm half time on with my kids and half time by myself, right? Which is a strange yo-yo of sort of everything and then nothing, right? And and what I realized, what this older part of me or younger part of me brought to the foreground was like, I know all about this kind of stuff, and here's what works for you, right? And so like, and so I've been doing some things like tracking down records that I used to listen to during that time as well. And so it's like, my 16-year-old self listening to Metallica or listening to punk rock and whatever. I've been like finding very particular albums and like playing them and stuff. And just, it's amazing the transformation. I throw it on the turntable and I play it, and then I go whatever, do the dishes or draw or do stuff. And there's such a colossal comfort that returns from those things, which is very unexpected to me. That sort of that not only do those pieces have a need for attention, but they also have a lot to offer. And so it's been a revisiting of those pieces and sort of accessing them, which has been very, very interesting. So
yeah, I think it's so funny that you bring that up, because I've been doing similar work with myself, and it is in no way, in any shape or form, unrelated to relationship anarchy. And it's kind of like internal relationship anarchy, and just like overthrowing the structure or overthrowing the hierarchy that my present self, my oldest self, has the authority. When like, if we're being straight up, like our little baby selves are running the show like at least 50% of the time. All the parts of us that never got our needs met, or that like weren't seen and all this shit. Like this is
Sure.
what we're talking about when we're talking about healing and
Yeah.
the work, you know.
Yeah. No,
It's doing
exactly.
repair and
All
learning to be in supportive relationship with those parts.
hmm Yeah, you want to access something interesting about relationships. Go back and look at what was going on for you when you hit puberty, right? Well, what were you involved in, or not involved in? What was going on around you? It's like, man, there's a lot of stuff that even after many years of working on things, there's more that can be offered and learned from that stuff, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah. And so like disrupting those internal hierarchies is so essential to disrupting the external hierarchies in the relationships between ourselves and other people.
hmm
And like I was saying, like looking at relationships as places only where we get our needs met and meet the needs of others doesn't allow the room for um, other parts of ourselves to show up, you know, and just it centers those parts of us that have unmet needs. And like that's important, but it doesn't need to be the center, you
no,
know. But so often that happens because in relationship we're trying to do and we're trying to provide for ourselves what sociopolitically and culturally is absent.
hmm
So relationships like these intimate one-on-one containers get flooded with um, all the pain and all the grief in the absence of community,
hmm
you know. And so there is so much medicine to be had in once again having your relationship to yourself be fundamental to your relationship with everyone else, so that more can be possible than just the strain of trying to check off all the boxes with each other all the time.
hmm No, for sure. Well, and again, as also in parenting, right? For me, this prospect of, those relationships have different dynamics, because I am responsible for those people. Um, but that process of taking care of myself deeply in my relationship to them also creates a big difference, right? So like this
Mm.
this idea of like being really, really clear about, what do I need from them? Well, you know, I think the better question is, what would I like from them? Please clean up your plates, please take your stuff to the kitchen, please, whatever. Um, but there's a lot of ways in which in those relationships, when I see other people and I see people talk about things, um, younger people are denied the thing that older people would do, right? It's like if people want to eat out, like not everybody, but like, if the kids, what do you want for dinner? I don't want to eat it. Well, we're not eating it. We're whatever. But if the adult wants to eat it, then it happens, right? And like, so like just noticing those places where, not where the parenting needs to happen, right? But where the dynamics are actually, ageist dynamics, right? Dynamics around sort
Right.
of thinking, well, kids don't know what they want. And my experience is kids actually really
Mm-hmm.
know what they want. I knew what I wanted, when my kids know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
The scout group that I helped run, those kids know what they want, right? Is it always possible? Is it whatever? Well, that's a whole other question. But the idea that they know at least as well and maybe better than we do what they want, right? And like when I say we do, I mean then like grown-ups are able to articulate what they want, right? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's very interesting to sort of see those kinds of dynamics and look at that stuff and bring it into parenting as well. And then also, as you were kind of saying, that idea of like, how do I make sure that I am showing up in a really with as much capacity as possible and with as much clarity about my needs and working to get my needs met in other places, so that I'm not trying to get them met in ways that are unhealthy through the kids. It's, to me, it's an exact extension of
Mm-hmm.
the same idea that I have in relationships, right? There are lots of ways in which anybody, myself included, might have an impulse to get something met in a relationship that maybe it doesn't really make sense, right? Maybe it's better off actually being
Mm-hmm.
counseled about or met elsewhere or whatever, as opposed to, looking for that to be found in other ways. So I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like I drifted a bit there.
No, not at all. I mean, if you did, it was to all the right places. I think that it's like alternative relationship models that allow those options to even be possible, of understanding like, oh, I can get this need met over here, or where is the appropriate place for this to take up space, and with the most consent, because I think often, like, what happens with hierarchy is that we're conditioned to think hierarchy is a synonym for substance, or a synonym for meaning, or a synonym for quality. But it's not, and I think, like, you're touching on that when you're talking about parenting. It's just like, okay, here's the hierarchy, so like I'm automatically in charge. I automatically have the authority, and I automatically know everything. And like, but that actually removes substance, that removes opportunity for equality, and that removes opportunity for depth and meaning to actually take place in the relationship. And so that's true for every kind of relationship. If we're relying on hierarchy to give context and to give meaning and to give definition to relationships, then we're missing out on the whole point of relationship, which is that it's dynamic and it's alive, and it helps us tap into that part of ourselves, that inner child part that does know what we want, that is clear on our desires. And I think people often think polyamory, non-monogamy, relationship anarchy, whatever it is about having more quantity. And like, sure, that may or may not be true. It really fucking depends. But to me, these alternative relationship models are about quality over quantity. Because even if let's say you're in conventional relationship models, and you're like, okay, well, I have my partner, and I have my family, and I have my friends, I have all this quantity, and so I should be good, I should feel like I have community. But you can be totally missing the depth and connection that you actually crave and you actually desire.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the things I've been spending some brain cells on, is what kind of attention do I want? What kind of connection do I want or need right now? And and I think that it starts to I mean, theoretically, there are many people I could connect with, and I've been connecting with lots of people for sure, remotely and online and what have you. But it's so great to be clear about what kind of attention I want, what qualities do I need it to have, because, talking to my family, my mom, or talking to whomever is very different than talking to other people, right? Is very different than, a structured peer counseling session. It's very different than, whatever else, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it brings us back in a really powerful and terrifying way to our personal ability to respond to ourselves and to adapt and to adjust, and like the amount of discernment required to navigate unconventional relationship models or alternative relationship models with the least harm takes time. It takes time to gather that discernment. It takes experience, and even when you have acquired some, the fundamental truth remains is that it's always changing. What you need and what you want will always be changing. And that doesn't mean like day to day, like the example that I was using earlier, right? But season to season, period to period, like, because you're growing, you're changing, hopefully. And so for me, I think what's cool about being in relationship with other people who are also devoted to relationship anarchy or anti-capitalist relationship frameworks is that we have the room for that understanding, have the room for that knowledge that we're going to change. And when you are in a relationship with someone else who also understands that God is change and change is constant, then you can change together, and there's a higher chance of longevity, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't need it to stay looking a certain way or stay feeling or being a certain way or showing up in a certain way. It can evolve and it can mature and it can deepen, or it can spread out, like just like nature, like the examples are endless of
Mm-hmm.
what can happen when something's allowed to develop organically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the freedom in a relationship anarchy model is that relationship can look like anything that you collectively decide it looks like, right? That you collectively decide it makes sense, that it looks like for both of you. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is amazing and profound. And I think that it also, you got to know what you really want then, right? Like if you're not going to accept the defaults,
Yeah, if
then
you throw the hierarchies out, the responsibility increases.
mm-hmm. No, exactly,
Because you
right?
have to shape it, and you also have to be collaborative too.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. How do you discover what you want?
I've been in the habit of discovering what I want by playing around with what I don't want.
Okay. Uh-huh. Fair enough.
So I think I'm more consistently choosing a different route to clarity, which has so far involved a lot of contemplation and a lot of that surrender that I was talking about earlier, of allowing things to unfold, and
Mm-hmm.
as they unfold, like paying attention to my responses and paying attention to what feels good and what feels supportive and what feels true
Mm-hmm.
and what doesn't. And so allowing, like, literally the process of being present and experiencing and experimenting to teach me what I want. So sometimes it is an excavation of an original desire that already resides within me, and other times I learn it from things that are happening outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's contemplation and, journaling, like just asking myself, right, and being like, oh shit, yeah, there it is. And other times it's like, oh, I don't fucking know, because I wasn't taught once to even care what the fuck I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just don't know, because this is all uncharted territory. And so I'm going to be open to not only allowing everything to unfold and emerge around me with this person or with these people or whatever, but to also look at the way that my desire is showing up in the process. So you have to move slowly for that shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean what I think I used to think that slowly meant, which is climate control, and just trying to make sure everything's perfect or everything's contained or everything's organized or whatever. But the slowness that comes from actual surrender, when you're just like, okay, I am going to pay attention to myself and to how I'm showing up and to what I want and need, and everything else is only my responsibility to respond to. But I can't control it. I can't manage it. I can't, do anything about it. And that slows you down. That increases your presence. And I think for me, I've had the experience that increasing my presence has accelerated the clarity of my desire.
Yeah.
So less like looking for it and searching for it, and more letting it find me where I'm at.
Yeah. I think I would, I think that the other thing that and this, I think again, it's sounds, as I'm pondering it, it's the same thing in a different language, maybe. You know, I think for me, it's also about noticing when it's there, right? Like, there are many things that if you had asked me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not interested in that, or
Yeah,
I'm not attracted to
exactly.
that, or I don't find that
Yeah.
hot, or whatever. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation, you're just like, ooh, baby, I
Yeah.
just really, really want that. And, you know,
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
like, if you could be present and notice those things, then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's really fascinating, right? And you know, I was talking with a good friend of mine this morning about desire, right? And how desire is like, you know, stretch your arms as far as you go, and it desires a spectrum even bigger than that. And yet, you know, media is a little slice, you know, our upbringing is a little slice, our experiences is likely a small slice. And yet, if we're present and if we're around, you know, and open, then maybe that desire can become something quite broad and surprising, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and our opportunity for pleasure, engagement, connection, and so on becomes, you know, quite broad, possibly, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we stop being so clinical about shit, and if we
Uh-huh.
stop assuming that we're supposed to know everything,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know, and like that's what I mean. Like sometimes I do know, sometimes it is in there somewhere, and sometimes desire is something that you choose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a manner of resonance. Like it is so much about not making assumptions about yourself or other people, and just literally like letting yourself try things. But like, especially when you're an adult TM, you're not supposed to be trying things. You're supposed to have it already figured out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that, yeah, this idea that we it goes back to conversations that I've had a bunch um, around magic, you know, and this idea that for me, a lot of magic is identity magic now, right? It's this process of like changing who I think I am to be more who I actually am, or to center those parts of me that are perhaps most um, skilled, efficient, excited about, or engaged in a given direction, you know? And so like, I actually like, I don't like accounting. I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't like bookkeeping and numbers and taxes and banking and all of that stuff.
Why not, Andrew? I can't imagine why.
It's so tedious. I'll tell you, I can go on for a long time. We could do next episode. We'll just do the why does Andrew not like accounting episode. Buckle up, everybody. It's going to be equally as boring as you think accounting might be. No offense to people who
I would
love
love to
accounting.
come back for that so we can both rage about it.
You know, but I also understand that clarity around the numbers of running my business is really fruitful, right? And clarity around the arbitrary and shifting rules around taxes is really fruitful, and so on, right? And so I did a bunch of work to basically like manufacture my own inner accountant piece, you know, and it took quite a while because it's one of the things that's sort of farthest from my punk rock soul, but you know, but it happened, and it's there, and I can access it now, you know, and I can joke about disliking accounting, but I can show up and do my bookkeeping without the angst and inner turmoil that used to otherwise follow it, right? And I think that this sort of question of who we are, how we are, in really limited ways, can be shifted quite a lot if we accept that, and if we accept that letting go of this sort of concrete, hierarchical, solid, structural, permanent idea of who we are for something much more fluid and flowing It allows us tremendous capacity then around work, money, love, home life, anything really, right? And I think that's sort of that's the other side of maybe that presence for me, right? Being very, very present and loosening the reins on who I think I am.
Yeah.
Those two pieces together allow for some pretty wonderful stuff to emerge.
Yeah, they have to be in collaboration. Listen, I'm going to say something that I think, is one of the best kept secrets. Fluidity is a discipline.
Uh-huh.
And I think that because of our limited understandings of discipline and of fluidity under the constructs of capitalism, that's so hard to grasp and so hard to realize. And that applies to, our personal development, like you're saying, and our relationship to ourselves and our identity, and also to other people. So relationship anarchy and like these other alternative relationship models, like I was saying earlier, people often think it's about like having more quantity, and again, may or may not be true, but the fucking point is that this shit is so intensive. It requires your discipline. It requires your attention, but not discipline in the way that we understand it in capitalism and in whiteness and in the hierarchy. Discipline as devotion, discipline as, that clarity of commitment and that clarity of value, and making choices, whether you feel like it or not, that are aligned with your values. And in that way, showing solidarity to yourself and showing solidarity to others. And like fluidity and discipline, I feel like I'm really, really excited and really eager to continue repairing the synonym bridge between those two words.
Yeah.
Like we need discipline to be truly fluid, and we need fluidity to be truly disciplined.
Yeah. So it reminds me of one of my magical teachers. We were at an event, and he was an interesting dude, and he would like put people on the spot and ask them questions as sort of like as his teaching method, and I'm not really I'm not really clear in what ways that was helpful and what ways it wasn't. But there was a particular evening where, the one of the things that sort of just talked about is how like, maybe 1 in 10 people will make it past the first sort of level of training and kind of like Western ceremonial stuff, right? And I think there are possibly many reasons for that, but on this evening, the person was asking all the prospects, so like, why do you think you're going to be different? Why are you going to be not the 9 people who stop, right? And everybody had all of these answers, and and a lot of the answers were around like discipline and strength of will and like all these kinds of things, right? And my answer to that was because I'm always willing to give up who I think I am in order to discover who I am now, and so that like fluidity, right? That commitment to that energy, right? And I think that I think it's interesting to see how that working and being willing to sort of let go of your notions of who you are can be so fruitful and helpful in situations, right? Or the inability or the lack of desire or whatever it is around that can be so anchoring and problematic, right? So yeah.
I have a horoscope membership that I offer on my site, and every month I like write about what's going on astrologically, in a more distilled way, and I offer horoscopes. And I've been writing so much about this, but in terms of thinking less about who I am and more about how I am, and that how I am choosing to be and how I'm choosing to behave is who I am. And that's why it's so fluid, you know, and it's I think it's allowed me, thinking of it in that way, has allowed me some space from trying to, just for me, because of, like we were talking about earlier, like I am a very structured person. And so I do try to find the thing to hold on to, you know, the one truth, you know, I can't help myself. And so it's been helpful for me to do less of that in relationship to my identity and who I am, and think more about how I'm choosing to be and allowing that to be where I focus my attention. And then having these really beautiful moments of looking at my growth and looking at myself and being like, oh shit, like this is who I am, you know, and this is who I've become. And I used to be so focused on who do I want to become and trying to have this vision of myself. And I think visualization and having a vision and all these things are really beautiful rituals for healing yourself. And yeah, I've found myself straying from that into having gratitude or cultivating gratitude for where I'm at and how I am and who I am right now, so that I can like actually be present, you know. And so that's been my new angle in relationship to what you're saying about, like, I'm always willing to let go of who I think I am, you know, for who I actually am. And when I stop trying to think of who I want to be, I can focus more on how I'm being. And it's just been a really significant shift for me that, you know, of course, has greatly impacted my relationships as well. Because the same way we rely on hierarchy in relationships to provide us with the structure and the content and the quality of our relationships, I think we also rely on our ideas of who we are, who we want to be, to kind of carry us through when it's like you actually have to be those things, you know. So how's that going?
that has to be true, right? What, you know, at some level that needs to be true and in action, right? Yeah, because I think that, like, yeah, it's like this idea, you know, that we'll discover who we're, you know, like, you know, we'll discover who we're meant to be, right? You know, like our, you know, our higher calling, our, you know, our true nature, or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you could discover, you can get to that thing, but that thing is a living, dynamic expression, not a like, you know, a fancy hat we put on and we're done. It's like, oh, no, that just continues and continues. Yeah.
I deal with that a lot with, or not deal, I have that conversation a lot with my queerants. You know, people want to look at their astrological chart with those questions in mind. You know, what is my purpose, or who am I, or all these questions that I'm deeply familiar with. And it's been really beautiful and restorative in my practice as an astrologer to help people reorient towards, you know, we can talk about that in a meta sense, but like, where are you right now, you know, and what do you want right now, and who are you right now, and what's true right now. That's so much more relevant than any vision we can construct together or that you can construct on your own. You know, and it just like takes us a weight off. It's like, oh shit, like, okay, so right here and right now is where it's at, you know?
Exactly. No, for sure. That's it. Well, maybe that's a good place to leave this conversation, or to wrap it up.
Right here, right now is where it's at.
Right here, right now. That's it. Just be right where you're at, and see what's going on from there. And to follow Andrew and Ari's 16-hour conversation about the intricacies of accounting and their feelings about it. Perhaps with astrological and maybe some elemental and goetic magical insertions into the mix. So
no doubt,
it's never
no doubt.
Where do people come find you? Where's the places for people to track you down?
Yes, on the internet, www.saltwaterstars.com. On Instagram, saltwater.stars. On Twitter, saltwaterstars_. And on Facebook, Saltwater Stars. So the ocean basically is where you can find me, or the sky at any given time.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you. Such a pleasure, as always.
Hey, folks. Thanks, as always, for listening. I super appreciate it. If you enjoyed what you are hearing, you can certainly help out the podcast and me by sharing this, by pointing it to different people who might really enjoy it, as well as if you wanted to get in on some of that Patreon goodness. I definitely appreciate the support in whatever ways that makes sense for you. And I hope that people are really enjoying the bonuses they're getting there. So we'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.